A story begins not with action, but with a feeling that something greater is about to unfold in a time when love inside a home was slowly turning into silent jealousy. There lived a child whose presence alone carried a strange light. Yusuf A.S. was not just another child in his family. There was something about him that made his father, Prophet Yaqub A.S., love him deeply and protectively. This love was not ordinary, and deep inside the hearts of his brothers, it slowly began to create questions that turned into discomfort, and discomfort that turned into resentment. The breaking point did not come through conflict, but through a dream. One night, Yusuf As saw something that he did not fully understand, yet it stayed in his heart. 11 stars, the sun and the moon, were all bowing to him. When he shared this vision with his father, Prophet Yaqub A.S., immediately understood its weight. He knew this was not just a dream, it was a message, a sign of a future chosen by Allah, a destiny far beyond what a child could comprehend. But instead of sharing it openly, he advised Yusuf A.S. to keep it hidden, because even divine truth can attract danger when hearts around you are not pure. That silence changed everything in the same house where Yusuf A.S. lived. Peacefully, emotions began to shift. His brothers started observing everything. Why was their father more attached to him? Why did Yusuf A.S. stand out? These questions did not stay harmless. They grew slowly into a hidden fire. Jealousy does not appear suddenly. It builds quietly until it begins to control decisions. And here, the emotional tension of this story begins to rise, because what was once a loving family environment is now silently breaking from within. Yusuf A.S., however, remained unaware of what was building around him. He continued to live with innocence, unaware that the people closest to him were slowly drifting into darkness. The brothers, instead of confronting their feelings in a healthy way, allowed suspicion to guide them. They began talking among themselves, questioning the fairness of their father's love. In their minds, they were not just competing for attention anymore. They were beginning to see Yusuf A.S. as a problem that needed to be removed. This is where the emotional weight of the story deepens, because the danger is no longer outside the family, but inside it. As time passed, their thoughts became more dangerous. The same hands that once played with Yusuf A.S. were now considering betrayal, and while Yusuf A.S. remained a symbol of purity in this growing darkness, the brothers were slowly stepping into a decision that would change their lives forever. The contrast between innocence and jealousy becomes the central emotional tension, creating a sense that something irreversible is about to happen. This is not just a story of a child and his dream, it is the beginning of a journey where divine destiny is unfolding quietly while human emotions are breaking loudly. What seems like a simple household conflict is actually the starting point of a much greater plan, one that no one inside that home can yet understand. And as the tension continues to rise, the question naturally forms in the mind: when jealousy grows this deep, what will it eventually lead to? The foundation has been set. A dream has been seen, love has been tested, and jealousy has started to take shape. What happens next will not only change Yusuf A.S.'s life, but also reveal how even betrayal can become part of a divine plan that leads to greatness. A story reaches its turning point when trust breaks from the closest place. What began as quiet jealousy inside a family slowly transforms into a decision that will echo through history. Yusuf As is still a child of innocence, unaware that the very people he trusts the most are preparing something that will change his life forever. His brothers are no longer just confused by their emotions, they are now convinced that removing Yusuf As will bring them relief in their minds. They are solving a problem, but in reality, they are stepping into a moment of betrayal that cannot be undone. The plan begins with deception. They approach their father with soft words and a carefully constructed request. They ask to take Yusuf A.S. with them, claiming they want to play and spend time together as brothers. Prophet Yaqub A.S., with his deep understanding of human nature and his divine insight, feels a hidden concern. Something inside him senses danger. He knows Yusuf As is precious, not only as a son, but also as part of a greater destiny. Yet, he also understands that moments of life are written with wisdom beyond human control. Eventually, he allows the request, but his heart is heavy, and his caution reflects a silent warning that something is not right. As the journey begins, the environment changes. What looked like a simple outing slowly turns into isolation. The atmosphere becomes quieter, more distant, and emotionally colder. Yusuf A.S. is still unaware, still trusting, still believing that he is among brothers who care for him, but behind his back, the emotional shift has already taken place. The brothers' conversations are no longer filled with affection, they are filled with execution of a plan, and the deeper they move into isolation, the closer they come to a moment that will define their moral collapse. When they finally reach the chosen place, the truth begins to reveal itself. The surroundings are empty, distant from safety, and perfect for what they have planned. The conversation turns sharp, the warmth disappears completely. Yusuf A.S. begins to sense something unusual, but innocence often struggles to recognize betrayal until it is too late. In a moment that feels frozen in time, the decision is made. The brothers overpower him. The trust that once held them together breaks completely. Yusuf A.S. is taken to a deep and silent place that represents abandonment and helplessness. The moment he is dropped into the well, everything changes. The sound of the world above fades, light begins to disappear, darkness surrounds him from all sides. Yet, this darkness is not just physical, it is emotional, psychological, and symbolic. A child who trusted his family is now alone in a place where no human voice can reach him. But this is where the hidden truth of the story begins to unfold. Even in absolute isolation, Yusuf A.S. is not abandoned. The plan of Allah is still active, even when human plans reach their lowest point. Above the well, silence follows the act. The brothers return, carrying the weight of what they have done, pretending to hide their guilt under a false narrative. They prepare excuses for their father, trying to replace truth with deception. But what they do not realize is that they have not ended Yusuf A.'s story. They have only moved it to its next chapter. The well, which appears as a place of destruction, is actually the beginning of a journey that will transform him from a forgotten child into a figure of destiny. Inside the darkness, Yusuf A.S. is not broken in the way humans expect. Instead, this moment becomes a test of trust, patience, and unseen hope. When everything visible disappears, something invisible becomes stronger. And this is where the audience begins to understand a deeper reality. Sometimes the deepest darkness is not the end, but the hidden start of elevation that no one can yet see. What happens next will prove that even in betrayal there is a design, even in silence there is a plan, and even in the deepest well there is a path that leads towards something far greater than anyone in that moment can imagine. A journey that begins in betrayal does not end in darkness. It only changes form after the silence of the well, after the emptiness of abandonment. Something unexpected happens. Yusufas is no longer in the place where he was left. The world around him has shifted again, as if unseen forces are moving him forward. What the brothers thought would end his story has instead placed him into a new chapter, one they could never control. A caravan passes by the area, travelers searching for water, unaware that their discovery will carry more weight than they can understand. When the bucket is lowered into the well, what they pull out is not just a child, but a living secret of destiny for them. It is an unexpected find for Yusuf A.S. It is another transition in a journey he cannot yet comprehend. Instead of recognition, he is met with confusion. And instead of protection, he is placed into a world where value is measured in material terms, not human dignity. The caravan takes him toward Egypt, a land far from his home, far from his family, and far from everything familiar. Along the way, silence surrounds him once again, but this silence is different. It is no longer the darkness of a well, but the uncertainty of being carried into the unknown. His identity, his past, and his emotions are all invisible to those who see him. To them, he is not a story unfolding, he is an item being transported. And this is where the emotional weight of humiliation becomes deeply visible. In Egypt, the marketplace becomes the stage of his next trial. People gather not to understand him, but to evaluate him. Prices are discussed, offers are made. In that moment, something deeply painful happens. A child with divine destiny is reduced in the eyes of society to something that can be bought and sold. Yet, beneath this outward humiliation, something unseen is already taking shape, because while people measure worth with money, Allah is shaping a future that no price can define. When he is finally sold, it is not the end of dignity, but the beginning of transformation. The hands that take him do not realize that they are not simply acquiring a servant, but becoming part of a story they cannot control. Yusuf A.S. enters a new environment, one that appears controlled and powerful on the surface, but internally becomes another stage of testing. This moment marks a silent shift from abandonment to ownership, from darkness to exposure, from isolation to visibility. But none of these external changes can touch what Allah has already written within him. Even in this moment of apparent low status, there is something different about Yusuf A.S. His presence carries calmness, his behavior reflects discipline, his silence carries weight. People around him may not understand it yet, but something about him does not belong to ordinary circumstances. This is where the hidden truth begins to emerge. Slowly, true value is not destroyed by circumstances, it is only revealed through them. As he moves deeper into this new life, the audience begins to see a pattern forming. Every stage that looks like decline is actually redirecting him toward elevation. The well was not an end. The market is not a destination. Egypt is not a prison. It is a pathway, and each moment of humiliation is quietly building the foundation of something far greater than what the human eye can currently see. What comes next will not just test his position in society, but test his inner strength, his character, and his connection with truth itself, because destiny does not reveal itself all at once. It unfolds step by step, even when the world assumes the story is already broken. A new chapter begins where appearance suggests safety, but reality holds the deepest test. Yet Yusuf A.S. is now inside the house of Aziz of Egypt. On the outside, it looks like stability has finally arrived after the chaos of betrayal, the darkness of the well, and the humiliation of the market. But destiny does not bring peace to end a story early. It brings peace to prepare a soul for a greater test. Inside this house, Yusuf A.S. grows into a young man of remarkable beauty, discipline, and character. His presence is different, not loud, not aggressive, but calm and controlled. He carries himself with dignity, even in a position where he holds no power. The people around him begin to notice that he is not like others. There is something in his behavior that reflects purity, and something in his silence that reflects strength. But with time, attention begins to shift in a dangerous direction. The wife of Aziz begins to feel an attraction that slowly turns into obsession. At first, it is subtle glances, thoughts, curiosity, but over time, it becomes a direct challenge. The environment that once felt safe now becomes emotionally heavy. Yusuf A.S. is no longer just living in a household. He is now inside a silent battlefield where temptation and faith stand face to face. This is not a physical war, but an inner one, far more difficult than anything he has faced before. One moment changes everything. Doors are closed, privacy is ensured, pressure increases. And in that moment, the test becomes real. Yusuf A.S. is presented with a situation where obedience to desire could bring comfort in this world, but disobedience brings difficulty. The choice is not simple, but the principle is clear. In that moment of intense pressure, his response defines his character completely. He does not follow impulse. He does not surrender to temptation. Instead, he turns away, choosing protection over pleasure and truth over temporary comfort. But every test has consequences in this world. What is right is not always rewarded immediately. Instead of being understood, Yusuf A.S. is accused. Truth is replaced with falsehood. A moment of purity is turned into a narrative of blame, and suddenly, the one who protected himself becomes the one who is questioned. This is where emotional injustice becomes part of his journey. The audience begins to feel the weight of a system where truth does not always win instantly, and innocence can be misunderstood. He is taken from the house that once gave him shelter and placed into confinement, not because he is guilty, but because perception has overtaken reality. Yet, even in this transition, something powerful remains unchanged. His inner state, circumstances shift, but character does not collapse. This is where the true meaning of patience begins to form. Patience is not silence without pain. It is control despite pain. Inside this stage of his life, Yusuf A.S. faces a different kind of isolation. Not the darkness of a well, not the humiliation of a market, but the emotional weight of being falsely judged. It is here that inner strength becomes more visible than external freedom, because when everything outside is taken away, what remains inside becomes your real identity. And even in this moment of false accusation, the story is not breaking it, is deepening every layer of difficulty, is building a foundation for something greater that has not yet been revealed. The House of Aziz, which once represented safety, has now become the place where Yusuf AS is tested not by people but by temptation itself. And this test is not the end of his journey, but another step toward a destiny that continues to move forward even when everything around him appears to fall apart. A moment of false accusation changes everything that was built on patience and discipline. Yusuf As, who had already survived betrayal, darkness, humiliation, and temptation, now enters a phase of life where freedom itself is taken away. He is placed inside prison, not because he committed injustice, but because truth in this world is often tested before it is revealed. What appears to be punishment is actually another layer of divine preparation. Inside prison, life becomes completely different from anything he has experienced before. There is no comfort of a house, no noise of the outside world, and no recognition of who he truly is. Days pass in silence, and silence slowly becomes the language of his life. But even in this isolation, Yusuf AS does not break. Instead, something deeper begins to form within him. When external support disappears, internal connection becomes stronger. His relationship with Allah becomes his only source of strength. The environment around him is filled with people who are also suffering in their own ways. Prisoners come with confusion, fear, and emotional burden. But even here, Yusuf AS does not isolate himself emotionally. He begins to understand people, listen to their concerns, and offer clarity. Where there is confusion, his ability to interpret dreams becomes a symbol of insight, not just knowledge. People begin to see that even in confinement, his presence carries meaning. But what makes this stage more powerful is the silence. There is no immediate recognition, no public validation, no reward system. Everything he does exists without external applause. Yet this is where true strength develops, because power that depends on attention is fragile, but power built in silence becomes unshakable. Yusuf AS is not being forgotten, he is being refined. Years pass in this state, time becomes slow, but purpose becomes deeper. In the outside world, his name is not discussed. In the prison walls, his identity is reduced to a prisoner. But in the unseen reality, his position is being elevated. What looks like delay is actually design. What looks like abandonment is actually protection. And what looks like silence is actually preparation. Then comes a moment that changes the direction of his life again. A dream from the ruler of Egypt shakes the entire system. No one can interpret it. Confusion spreads among advisors and scholars. In that moment, the name of Yusuf AS returns, not because he sought attention, but because his truth could no longer be ignored. From prison, he is called not as a prisoner, but as a solution. This shift alone shows the hidden pattern of his journey. Every stage of decline was actually a step toward responsibility. Every moment of isolation was building clarity of mind. Every silence was strengthening wisdom. And now, as he prepares to step out of confinement, something important becomes clear. Prison was not a place of defeat. It was a place where identity, patience, and insight were constructed. In silence, the world outside is about to meet a man who was not shaped by comfort, but by testing. And this transformation marks the beginning of a new phase, one where hidden potential finally starts to become visible. A turning point arrives when silence from the outside world suddenly breaks for a purpose far greater than expectation. For years, Yusuf AS had lived behind prison walls, not known for status, not recognized by power, and not called upon by society. But destiny never forgets a name written by divine planning. When the ruler of Egypt sees a disturbing dream that none of his advisors can explain, confusion spreads across the entire kingdom. Fear enters the system because uncertainty in leadership is more dangerous than visible conflict. In this moment of crisis, someone remembers a man from prison who once interpreted dreams with clarity and truth. Yusuf AS is called not because he seeks attention, but because truth has a way of resurfacing. When confusion becomes too heavy for human understanding, he is brought forward with no preparation for luxury, no transition into comfort, but directly into a moment where his knowledge will either prove valuable or be dismissed when the dream is presented to him. Yusuf As listens carefully. The dream is not treated as mystery or fear, but as information that carries meaning. He does not react emotionally, nor does he exaggerate. Instead, he explains with calm clarity that the dream is not random, but a message about the future of Egypt. Years of abundance will come, followed by years of severe hardship. This interpretation is not just symbolic, it is strategic, it is guidance for survival. What makes this moment powerful is not only the interpretation itself, but the transformation of perception. The same man who was once considered a prisoner is now speaking with authority that influences an entire nation. His words carry weight because they are not driven by desire, but by truth, and in that truth, leadership begins to recognize value where they once saw limitation. As the explanation unfolds, a plan begins to form. Yusuf As does not only interpret the dream, he also provides a solution. He advises preparation, storage, and careful management of resources during the years of abundance. This shows a level of wisdom that goes beyond interpretation. It reflects leadership, foresight, and responsibility. In this moment, he is no longer just reacting to circumstances, he is shaping outcomes. The ruler and his court begin to realize that this is not ordinary knowledge, it is insight that can save a nation. Slowly, the decision is made that Yusuf As should not return to prison. Instead, he should be placed in a position of trust and responsibility. This is the sudden shift that changes everything, from confinement to consultation, from isolation to influence, from forgotten presence to national advisor. But this rise is not emotional or rushed. It is controlled, measured, and based on trust earned through patience. Yusuf As does not demand power, he is assigned responsibility because his character has already proven itself through years of testing. This is an important turning point in the story. Elevation does not come from ambition alone, but from endurance, discipline, and truth maintained under pressure. As he steps into this new role, the audience begins to see a complete transformation. The same journey that started with betrayal, darkness, and imprisonment now leads to leadership over knowledge and strategy. And yet, even in this rise, his humility remains unchanged, because true power is not defined by position, but by how unchanged a person remains when position changes. This is the beginning of Yusuf As's rise, not as a reward for survival, but as a result of preparation that no one else could see. And what comes next will show how responsibility, when placed in the right hands, can turn a former prisoner into a key figure in the survival of an entire nation. A new phase begins where Yusuf As is no longer standing on the edge of society, but is now placed at the center of responsibility and decision-making in Egypt. His journey from betrayal to prison to recognition now reaches a stage where authority is given into his hands, not because he demanded it, but because truth naturally rises when it is needed most. The same people who once had no value for him are now depending on his wisdom for survival. In this position, Yusuf As does not behave like someone who has suddenly gained power. Instead, he carries the same humility that was built through years of hardship. He understands that leadership is not about control, but about justice and responsibility. He begins organizing resources, managing food supplies, and preparing the nation for the difficult years that were already predicted through the king's dream. His focus is not personal gain, but collective survival. What makes his leadership different is emotional maturity. He has lived through betrayal, slavery, false accusation, and imprisonment. So when he deals with people, he does not react with ego or revenge. Instead, he acts with balance and understanding. He knows what suffering feels like, so he does not increase the suffering of others. This is where his character becomes the foundation of his authority. People begin to trust him not only because of his knowledge, but because of his fairness. As time passes, Egypt begins to experience the predicted changes. Years of abundance arrive, and Yusuf As ensures that nothing is wasted. He builds systems of storage and discipline so that when the difficult years come, the nation will not collapse. His leadership is not emotional, it is strategic, yet deeply human. At the same time, he proves that strength is not in domination, but in protection and planning. During this period, his identity becomes fully established in the eyes of the nation, he is no longer seen as a prisoner or outsider, but as a pillar of stability. The same society that once ignored him now depends on him, but Yusuf AS remains unchanged inside because real power does not create arrogance, it reveals character. Yet even in this moment of authority there is a deeper emotional layer within him. Memories of his past still exist, but they do not control him. Instead, they guide him. He understands that everything he went through was not random, it was preparation for this exact responsibility. His return to control is not personal victory, but divine assignment. As he stands in this position of leadership, a quiet realization forms that power is not the final destination. It is only another test. How a person behaves when given authority is just as important as how they behaved when they had none. And Yusuf S. continues to lead with patience, justice, and emotional strength, unaware that the next chapter of his journey will bring him face to face with the past he thought was lost forever. A turning point arrives when the past returns without warning, and everything that was buried inside the heart begins to rise again. The years of separation have changed Yusuf AS completely. He is no longer the boy who was thrown into the well, and his brothers are no longer the same people who once betrayed him. But what remains unchanged is the weight of that moment, which still lives quietly inside the story. Famine spreads across the land, and people from distant regions begin traveling to Egypt in search of food. Among them are the brothers of Yusuf AS, who arrive unaware of the truth standing before them. Is now a man of authority, someone they depend on for survival, but they do not recognize him. The same face they once abandoned is now the one controlling their fate. Yusuf AS sees them immediately, but he does not reveal himself. His emotions are present, but controlled. Years of patience have taught him that reaction is not always the answer. Instead, observation and wisdom guide his actions. He listens to their needs and provides them assistance, treating them not with revenge, but with careful silence that carries meaning deeper than words. The encounter becomes emotionally heavy because while the brothers see a powerful official, Yusuf AS sees the past that once broke his heart. Every word they speak carries memories, every movement brings back moments of betrayal, but he does not allow emotion to take control, because true strength is not in reacting, but in holding back when the heart is under pressure. As they speak, they unknowingly reveal details of their family and mention a younger brother at home. Yusuf AS listens closely and begins to create a plan that will bring them back again, not for revenge, but for truth to slowly unfold. The test is no longer physical, it has become emotional and psychological, where patience is stronger than anger. When they return to their father Yaqub AS, the emotional atmosphere becomes heavier. The pain of separation still exists in the family, and now another son is taken as part of the journey. The wounds of the past have not healed, but they are being reopened in a different form, showing that time does not always erase pain, it sometimes brings it back for completion. Meanwhile, Yusuf AS continues to hold his position without revealing his identity. The tension inside him is deep but controlled. This is the moment where forgiveness and power stand face to face. And the real test is not what he suffered in the past, but how he will respond when he has full authority over those who once wronged him. The brothers return again under different circumstances, and pressure begins to build around them. Small actions and silent signs start pointing toward a truth they cannot yet understand, but the emotional weight is increasing, and the audience begins to feel that the moment of revelation is close. This part of the story is not about action, it is about emotions that have been held for years now, standing in silence, waiting for the moment when truth will finally break through. And what comes next will not only reveal identity, but also define the highest form of human character, which is forgiveness under power. The moment arrives when silence can no longer hold the truth, and the past that has been buried under years of patience finally comes face to face with reality. Yusuf AS stands in front of his brothers not as a prisoner, not as a forgotten child, but as the one who holds authority over their present situation. Yet they still do not recognize him. The distance of years has erased familiarity, but not destiny. Every interaction until now has been building toward this point. Emotions are high, but controlled tension is present. but unspoken, and the weight of recognition hangs in the air like something waiting to break. Yusuf As finally decides that the time of concealment is over, not out of anger, but because truth has reached its natural moment of revelation. He begins to speak slowly and calmly, asking them questions that slowly connect the dots of their past confusion. Their reactions start shifting from confidence to uncertainty as hidden truths begin to surface piece by piece until the realization begins to form in their minds that the man standing before them is not a stranger, but someone from their own past. The emotional impact hits suddenly the moment recognition becomes clear. The brothers are frozen in shock, guilt rises instantly, and memories of their past actions return with full intensity. The same person they abandoned in darkness is now standing in light of authority. This is not just a meeting, it is a confrontation with their own history. At this moment, Yusuf S. reveals his identity, and the truth becomes undeniable. Silence takes over the room as shock turns into emotional collapse. The brothers realize that the child they once betrayed has become the one who determines their survival. The emotional weight of this moment is beyond words because it brings together guilt, power, and truth in a single instant. What happens next defines the highest level of human character. Instead of revenge, Yusuf As chooses forgiveness. He does not respond with punishment. He does not return pain for pain. Instead, he speaks words that break the cycle of hatred. He tells them that there is no blame upon them today, and that Allah has already guided this entire journey toward a greater purpose. This forgiveness is not weakness, it is strength beyond human expectation. It shows emotional mastery that comes only after years of suffering, patience, and understanding of divine wisdom. The brothers are overwhelmed by relief and guilt, but Yusuf As does not allow the past to control the present. He frees them from fear and replaces it with mercy. In this final revelation, the story reaches its deepest emotional peak because it is not just about identity being uncovered, it is about transformation of the human heart. Betrayal turns into forgiveness, pain turns into peace, and separation turns into reunion under divine wisdom. And the audience begins to understand that every stage of suffering was leading to this single moment of mercy. And as the truth settles, the story quietly shifts from conflict to closure, showing that the highest victory is not control over others, but control over the self and forgiveness when power is in your hands. The story of Yusuf As does not end with power or reunion. It ends with understanding that every phase of life carries a hidden design that the human mind cannot fully grasp. While it is happening, what looked like betrayal was not random. What looked like loss was not destruction. And what looked like delay was actually preparation for something far greater than anyone involved could see at the time. When you step back from the entire journey, a pattern becomes clear. Innocence was tested, trust was broken, patience was stretched, and isolation became a classroom where character was built step by step. Yusuf As did not rise because life was easy. He rose because every difficulty shaped a part of his strength. That comfort could never create. This is the hidden truth most people miss, that hardship is not the opposite of destiny, it is part of it. The first lesson is that human plans are limited, but divine planning is complete. The brothers thought they were removing Yusuf Is from their father's love, but in reality they were placing him into a path that would elevate him beyond there. Understanding this teaches that not every event you dislike is against you. Sometimes it is redirecting you towards something you cannot yet see. The second lesson is patience. Under pressure, real patience is not passive waiting, it is controlled endurance. When everything inside you wants to react, but you choose restraint. Yusuf As experienced betrayal, slavery, false accusation, and imprisonment, yet he never allowed hatred to define his actions. This shows that emotional control is not weakness, it is a form of strength that builds long-term success. The third lesson is that character is revealed when no one is watching. In the well, in the market, in prison, and even in power, Yusuf As remained consistent. His Identity did not change with environment. This is the foundation of true dignity because external situations change, but internal values define who you really are. The fourth lesson is forgiveness. At the highest level, Yusuf IS had every reason to take revenge, but he chose mercy instead. This shows that real victory is not defeating others, it is rising. Above the desire for revenge, forgiveness is not forgetting pain, it is refusing to let pain control your decisions when you have power over it. The hidden truth of this entire story is that life is not a straight path, it is a series of hidden connections that only make sense when viewed from the end, not the beginning. Every moment of confusion, every moment of loss, and every moment of silence was part of a larger design that was always moving toward completion, even when it looked broken. And the final message is a mindset shift for anyone watching. Your current situation is not your final position. What you are going through right now is not the end of your story. It is a stage of development that is shaping you in ways you cannot yet understand. Just like Yusuf AS, your difficulties may be preparing you for a role you are not ready to see yet. So instead of asking why this is happening, the deeper question becomes, what is this shaping in me? Because sometimes what feels like delay is actually direction, and what feels like loss is actually alignment with a destiny that is still unfolding. And when you understand this, your entire perspective on life begins to change from frustration to trust, from confusion to clarity, and from fear to patience.